I'm Jeff Shields. I'm the dean here at the law school, and I'm so pleased that you were able to join us. One of the good things about getting older is that you're able to look back over a lifetime of experience in the area in which you have labored. And when you combine that experience with an extraordinary intellect like Gus Speth, you're able to address the major issues of our day in a far-ranging way, which is really quite unusual in a lecture. I was moved last night when I read Gus's piece that you're about to hear, because he really deals with the biggest issue of our day, certainly the biggest issue for those who are interested in environmental issues. And that is the question of where are our allies, and can the world live with the kind of materialism that we face? Gus, of course, as most of you, probably all of you know, brings, as I said briefly, an extraordinary background to this exploration. He's provided leadership and entrepreneurial initiatives to so many tasks over the years. I'm just going to name a few of them, including the President's Task Force on Global Resources and the Environment, the Western Hemisphere Dialogue on the Environment and Development, the National Commission on the Environment. Among his awards are the National Wildlife Federation's Resources Defense Award, the Natural Resources Council of America Barbara Swain Award of Honor, a Special Recognition Award from the Society for International Development, the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Environmental Law Institute, and the Blue Planet Prize. He has many publications. I'm sure that you're familiar with The Bridge at the Edge of the World, Capitalism, the Environment, and Crossing from Crisis to Sustainability, Red Sky at Morning. I told Gus the other day that I was cleaning out some shelves, and I found a note from my son. He'd given me that last book as I started this job, saying, "Dad, be sure to read it." And boy, was he right. Listen carefully, because there's an awful lot there. Listen carefully also because this lecture represents a work in progress for Gus. He's doing extraordinarily interesting work with our students and faculty and others around the world, trying to parse through the issues he touches upon here. There will be opportunities for you to inform him through your reaction to what he says tonight. With that, I'd like to turn over the podium to our esteemed Professor Gus Speth.
My goodness. Almost like some faculty members must have required some students to come tonight. I really appreciate the turnout, and I'm going to try to get the mic thing working. Can everybody hear? There's a little echo, but I don't know if...
Yeah, if you're going to use both, maybe let's lose this instead.
Okay.
With if you're using both mics, you could...
We'll just use this one, I think. Does that work? Good. Let me tell you how honored I am, really, that the dean would take it upon himself to provide an introduction. I really am touched by that, Jeff, and thank you so much, and thank all of you again for coming. I've been, this is my first year at VLS, and I have just want to say that I've been in a lot of educational institutions over my career, and I'm just enormously impressed with what I have discovered here. Last semester in teaching and working with the enormously talented faculty and enormously talented students here. It's been just a real pleasure, and I am enormously impressed with VLS. I gave this lecture originally in November as the E.F. Schumacher lecture. It's the 30th in their series of lectures. You may remember that E.F. Schumacher was the author of Small is Beautiful and other books, including A Guide for the Perplexed. And he really was the person in a way that started this localism movement, who really championed it, and the local focus movement owes him a great debt. That lecture in New York drew, normally the Schumacher lectures draw a crowd that I would say, well, most of the people share two things. They are environmentalists and they are liberals. And so I really couched the lecture as to such an audience, and was addressing these people who share these two values, and that's the audience I had in mind. It may not be entirely the case here, but I haven't changed the lecture. So those of you who may find yourselves not in one of those or both of those camps, just sit back and enjoy yourselves nevertheless. The bit of a stiff drink I've got in this talk, I think. You may need a stiff drink when I'm finished, too. So most of us bestride this uneasy gap that separates American liberalism and American environmentalism. And if we were asked by a pollster, for example, we would say yes to liberal and yes to environmentalist. And the progressive people in Congress normally support both causes. The Black Caucus, for example, has the best environmental voting record of any group in the Congress. But between the people in the Congress, they're the organized NGOs and other groups advocating for the two causes. And as you know, they tend to go their separate ways. The pattern that's common on the progressive side is every progressive cause in its own silo. And there's much less siloing that's common on the right, for example, where a typical think tank or advocacy group will cover everything from stripping EPA of its powers to address climate change to ensuring that the rich are minimally taxed. And I actually think that bringing these together has a lot to teach us, and that's a theme of the talk today. I want to argue that the walls separating liberalism and environmentalism have got to be breached, that to win there's got to be a fusion of progressive causes, that we've got to forge a common agenda, and together we've got to build a mighty grassroots force in the country. And I think this progressive fusion is necessary, of course, because we're stronger if we are supporting each other. But I think there are deeper realities that are driving us together beyond mere convenient alliance. For their part, I believe environmentalists are slowly coming to see that real progress with environmental issues is going to remain elusive unless the liberal agenda of social justice and political reform is steadily realized. In a land such as ours of pervasive economic insecurity and stark inequality, American environmentalists are going to keep on losing. And in such a land, the economic will continue to trump the environmental, and environmentalists will continue to live in this strange place where, to save the planet, we must show that what we are proposing helps the economy. In a similar way, environmentalists will also keep losing if American politics stays as it is today. The influence industry in Washington now spends over $6 billion a year and employs more than 35,000 lobbyists. And that data was from actually a few years ago. It's undoubtedly bigger now. Our friend Peter Barnes, who was here speaking at the school recently, wrote that in a capitalist democracy, the state is the dispenser of many valuable prizes. Whoever amasses the most political power wins the most valuable prizes. The rewards include property rights and friendly regulators, subsidies, tax breaks, and free or cheap use of the commons. He writes that we face a disheartening quandary. Profit-maximizing corporations dominate the economy. The only obvious counterweight is government, yet government is dominated now by the same corporations. So environmentalists need for liberals and their liberal causes to succeed. Is the opposite the case? Do liberal groups that fight for social justice and political reform need for environmentalists to succeed? I think the answer is yes. It's not as clear, but I think it's yes. For example, environmental successes on climate and energy would usher in an era of much-needed green job growth. A new rights-based approach to environmental protection is embracing liberal themes like climate justice, the human right to water and to food, the right to cultural survival, and many more areas of confluence. But what I really want to stress is something at a deeper level where I think there's a profound liberal stake in environmental success. Consider a world, for example, where environmentalists continue to lose on the big issues like climate change. Many of the most insightful observers we have today see current trends leading us to some type of collapse or catastrophe or breakdown, and they see climate change and other environmental crises as leading ingredients in this devil's brew. That also includes population stresses, peak oil and energy supply problems, global income disparities, economic and political instabilities, terrorism, failed states, nuclear proliferation, and new technology threats, and on. A world where environmentalists fail would be an increasingly nasty place. A world where environmentalists fail is a world of food and water shortages, of sea level rise, of increasing heat waves and fires and floods and storms, droughts and other so-called natural disasters, of deforestation and desertification and biotic impoverishment, pollution and toxification, energy shortages and other unpleasant surprises. It's not a world where the concerns of the poor and the powerless or even the average Joe are likely to fare well. And politics in such a world can move in unfortunate directions. Some who've constructed scenarios of the future see a continuation of business as usual as leading to a fortress world. Here's how Paul Raskin and his colleagues at the TELUS Institute describe the situation leading to this fortress world possibility. The global economy spawns a new class of internationally connected affluent. But there's a counterpoint to billions of desperately poor whose boats fail to rise with the general economic tide. In this atmosphere of deepening social and environmental crisis, conflict feeds off of old ethnic and religious and nationalistic tendencies. Poor countries begin to fragment as civil order collapses and various forms of criminal anarchy fill the vacuum. The bite of climate change and environmental devastation grows fiercer. The affluent minority fears that it too will be engulfed by rampant migration and violence, disease. So a system of global dualism evolves. Some call it fortress world. It emerges from these multiple crises. Separate spheres of the haves and the have-nots, the included and the excluded, are codified in authoritarian legal and institutional frameworks. The affluent live in protective enclaves in rich nations and in strongholds in the poor nations, bubbles of privilege amidst sea of misery. The police state outside the fortress, in the police state outside the fortress, the majority are mired in poverty and denied basic freedoms. My friend Clive Hamilton reports that in 2009 he attended a conference at Oxford of climate experts, And the question came up very forcefully, can we continue to gamble with democracy? The point was made that slashing emissions may require some form of benevolent tyranny. And as Hamilton notes, tyrannies rarely stay benevolent for long. In recent years, military experts and others have warned repeatedly that climate disruption can lead to humanitarian emergencies, climate refugees, conflicts over water and other resources, failed states, extreme north-south tensions, and any number of other threats to international security and peace. A new book, Climate Wars, just came out. So, of course, there's a lot of speculation in these various looks into the future. But at a minimum, one can conclude that the liberal program, the liberal agenda, is threatened by unfolding climate and other environmental trends. We know that at times of great stress and loss and instability, societies tend to illiberal answers. And so liberals need to appreciate how serious and near-term environmental threats actually are and what in fact is threatened. Political and social systems are threatened and not just ecological ones. So liberals, and indeed all of us, need to recognize that environmental threats are much too serious to be left to the environmentalist. And there's another line of inquiry that also points to the need for the greening of American liberalism. This area is opened up not by thinking about a world of environmental failure, but by thinking about the requirements for environment's success. Environmental analysis these days is pointing to some novel policy prescriptions that are definitely at odds with the prescriptions regularly urged by American liberals. The most important area where this latest environmental thinking conflicts with the current liberal agenda is on the issue of economic growth. Over the years, I've read a lot from a liberal community. I think of myself as a liberal. Most recently, I was reading Bob Reich's Aftershock. So I know that American liberals tend to be very strong advocates of economic growth. And indeed, the way the growth issue is shaped and framed in Washington today, those fighting the current battles there have little choice but to champion growth. But a large number of environmental thinkers are now urging a different perspective. They see a world where past growth has brought us to a perilous state environmentally, where we are poised for unprecedented increments of growth, where this growth is proceeding with wildly wrong market signals and without needed constraints, and where a failed politics has not meaningfully corrected the economy's obliviousness to environmental needs. In his book, Prosperity Without Growth, a leading British economist, Tim Jackson, frames the growth issue this way. The size of the world economy is on track to double and then double again by mid-century. This extraordinary ramping up of global economic activity has no historical precedent, is totally at odds with our scientific knowledge of the finite resource base and the fragile ecology on which we depend for survival. A world in which things simply go on as usual is already inconceivable, he writes. For the most part, we avoid the stark reality of these numbers. The default assumption is that growth will continue indefinitely, not just for the poorest countries, where a better quality of life is undeniably needed, but even for the richest countries, where the cornucopia of material wealth adds little to happiness and is beginning to threaten the foundations of our well-being. The reasons for this collective blindness are easy enough to find. The modern economy is structurally reliant on economic growth. Questioning growth is deemed to be an act of lunatics, idealists, and revolutionaries. But question it we must, he writes. The idea of a non-growing economy may be anathema to an economist, but the idea of a continually growing economy is anathema to an ecologist. no subsystem of a finite system can grow indefinitely in physical terms. And economists have to be able to answer the question of how a continually growing economic system can fit within a finite ecological system. The only possible response to this challenge is to suggest, as economists do, that growth in dollars be decoupled from growth in physical throughputs and environmental impacts. But this hasn't been achieved so far, and there are no prospects for it doing so in the immediate future. And the sheer scale of the decoupling required staggers the imagination. In short, he writes, we have no alternative but to question growth. In this regard, the essential existential issue of global warming and climate disruption is particularly worrying. Many analysts have concluded that it will probably be impossible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at required rates in the context of even moderate economic growth. The needed rates for reducing the carbon intensity of economic output are simply too high in a moderately or fast-growing economy. To reduce U.S. carbon emissions by 80% between now and 2050, the carbon intensity of production in the United States has got to decline by about 7% a year, every year, if we have an economy that's growing at about 3% a year. That's huge. It involves wringing carbon out of an economy at a phenomenal rate. A European analyst noted recently that the International Energy Agency optimistically, in their words, assumes that it's technically feasible to reduce carbon intensity by about 3.5% a year. That's a reduction of carbon intensity at only half the rate that I just noted was required for the U.S. And using that assumption, it showed that to hold greenhouse gas concentrations at 450 parts per million, global per capita income could only grow at about 1% a year, half the current rate. Even assuming that the 450 parts per million cap by 2050 is okay, which many, indeed I would say now most climate scientists doubt, growth rates in the industrial world will have to be near zero if growing room is to be left for the developing world. The New Economics Foundation in London, a group I have a lot of respect for, has recently completed an overview of the possibilities of dealing with the climate issue in the context of growth. And they put this title on their study, Growth Isn't Possible. And it's an appropriate title given their conclusions. In the end, the New Economics Foundation concluded that economic growth in the OECD countries cannot be reconciled with preventing dangerous climate change. Still, we should be able to solve this problem. Canadian economist Peter Victor, in his book Managing Without Growth, presents a model of the Canadian economy, and it shows that it's possible to develop scenarios over a 30-year time horizon for Canada in which full employment prevails, poverty is essentially eliminated, people enjoy more leisure, greenhouse gas emissions are dramatically reduced, and the level of government indebtedness declines, all in the context of first low and then ultimately no economic growth. The New Economics Foundation has an ambitious project underway to expand with Peter Victor on this work. So what we have is this emerging difference between liberals and environmentalists on growth. And it's important that we begin to resolve this difference, lest it grow and fragment even further the progressive forces in our country. And so we've got to ask, is it possible to successfully craft a common platform that brings together American environmentalists and American liberals, and how in that context do we deal with this emerging growth issue as a divisive force? Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, so let me offer for you the first draft of such a platform. The beginnings of an agenda for progressive fusion. And you be the judge. And for the sake of time, I'm going to concentrate exclusively on domestic and not foreign affairs. Platform begins as follows. We must begin by acknowledging that today's political economy is failing our country. This failure reaches many spheres of national life: economic, social, political, environmental. Indeed, our country can be said to be in a crisis in each of these four areas. The economic crisis of this current Great Recession, brought on by Wall Street financial excesses, we're all very familiar with. A social crisis of extreme and growing inequality has been unraveling the social fabric of our country for some decades. A tiny minority have experienced soaring incomes and accumulated grand fortunes, while wages for working people have stagnated despite rising productivity gains, and the poverty has risen to near 50-year high. Social mobility has declined, the middle class is disappearing, our schools are failing, prison populations are soaring, employment security is a thing of the past, and yet American workers still put in more hours than workers in other high-income countries. Indeed, maybe 300 hours a year more than most European economies. Thirdly, the environmental crisis, which we are very familiar with. And lastly, a political crisis, reflecting governmental paralysis and a democracy that is weak and shallow and corrupted by, as Bob Kaiser's book says, so damn much money. So to seek something new and better, a good place to begin is by asking why this system of political economy that we have today is failing so broadly. And it seems to me the answer is clear and straightforward. A combination of factors that we've all been aware of work together to yield these unfortunate results. An unquestioning society-wide commitment to economic growth at any cost, a powerful corporate interest whose overriding objective is to grow by generating profit, including profit from avoiding the social and economic costs they create and from keeping wages and benefits as low as they can get away with. Markets that systematically fail to recognize these externalized social and environmental costs unless corrected by government to do so, but government that is itself beholden to corporate interest and thus not strongly inclined to curb corporate abuses. And a rampant consumerism spurred on endlessly by sophisticated advertising. All of these things combine to deliver an ever-growing economy that is insensitive to the needs of people and place and planet. So we've worked within this system, this political economy, but we're beginning to realize that working within this system is not going to succeed when what is needed is transformative change in the system itself. And the case for immediate action on issues like climate and job creation is certainly compelling. But I think we're beginning to see that the big environmental and social challenges we face will not yield to a type of problem-solving incrementalism. Progressives have gone down this path of incremental reform for decades, and we've learned that it's not enough. We've learned that we need to reinvent the economy, not merely restore it. And the roots of our environmental and social problems are systemic and require transformative change. The shift to a new economy, a sustaining economy, based on new economic thinking and driven forward by a new politics. sustaining people, communities, nature. That's what we have to see from now forward as the core goals of economic activity. In the past, the core goals of economic activity have been market success, growth for its own sake, combined with some modest regulation to ease out the rough spots. So we need a paradigm shift to change the fundamental of what our economy is all about. As John DeGraff's recent film raised the issue, what's the economy for anyhow? So today, this reigning policy orientation holds that the path to greater well-being is to grow and expand the economy. Productivity, profits, the stock market, consumption have all got to go up and up. And this growth imperative trumps everything else. It can undermine our families, our jobs, our communities, the environment, our sense of place and continuity, because it's confidently asserted and widely believed that it's worth the price it must be paid. But I think an expanding body of evidence is now telling us to think again. Economic growth may be the world's secular religion, but for most of the world, it's a God that's failing, underperforming for billions of the world's people, and for those in the affluent societies, us, now creating more problems than it's solving. The never-ending drive to grow the overall U.S. economy hollows out our communities and the environment. It fuels a ruthless international search for energy and other resources. It fails miserably at generating the needed jobs, and it rests on a manufactured consumerism that's not meeting the deepest human needs. In short, we're substituting growth and consumption for dealing with the real issues, for doing things that would truly make us and the country better off. And psychologists have pointed out, for example, that while economic output per person in the United States has risen sharply in recent decades, there's been no increase in life satisfaction, and levels of distrust and depression have increased substantially. So I would argue that it's time for America to move to a post-growth society where working life and the natural environment and our communities and families and the public sector are no longer sacrificed for the sake of mere GDP growth, where the illusory promises of ever more growth no longer provide an excuse for neglecting to deal generously with our country's compelling social needs, and where a true citizen democracy is no longer held hostage to the growth imperative. All my life, I think I've heard that we have to keep growing because if we didn't, we would have to face the redistribution issue. Well, we've had tremendous growth. The income distribution has gotten wildly out of control. So it's time to deal with that issue directly and not thinking that we're dealing with it through more and more growth. And when you think about it, the growth imperative is how we are controlled. The necessity for growth puts American politics in a straitjacket, a golden straitjacket, as Tom Friedman would say. And it gives the real power in our society to those who have the finance and the technology to deliver growth. Of course, as I think we all appreciate, there are many things that do indeed need to grow in our society. Growth in good jobs and the incomes of the poor and working Americans. Growth in availability of health care and the efficiency of its delivery. Growth in education and research and training. Growth in security against the risks of illness and job loss and old age and disability. Growth in investment in public infrastructure and in environmental protection and amenity. Growth in the deployment of climate-friendly and other green technologies. Growth in the restoration of both ecosystems and local communities. growth in non-military government spending at the expense of the military, and growth in international assistance for sustainable and people-centered development for the half of humanity that now live in effective poverty. Well, these are all areas where public policy does need to ensure that growth occurs. I put jobs at the top of this list because they're so important and unemployment is so devastating. We should be striving to add 500,000 jobs a month in our country now. But the fact is that likely future rates of overall economic growth are only mildly associated, if at all, with declining unemployment. If you plot the unemployment rate against the growth rate, you see that your country needs to grow at about 3% a year just to not have unemployment increase. And that's about what we could expect in a good year now, is 3%. So the availability of jobs, the well-being of our people, the health of our communities should not be forced to wait to the day when overall economic growth might deliver them. It's time to shed the view that government mainly provides a safety net and occasional Keynesian stimuli. We've got to begin to insist that government has an affirmative responsibility to ensure that all those seeking jobs find them. And the surest and most cost-effective way to that end is direct government spending and investments and incentives targeted at creating jobs in areas of high social benefit. And there are many, many such areas. Creating new jobs in areas of democratically determined priority is certainly better than trying to create jobs by pump priming aggregate economic growth, especially in an era such as ours when the macho thing to do in much of business is to shed jobs, not create them. Of particular importance for the new economy are government policies that will slow GDP growth, thus sparing the environment, while simultaneously improving social and environmental well-being. Such policies exist. A shorter work week with longer vacations, more time for children and families, greater labor protections and job security and benefits, including generous parental leaves, guarantees to part-time workers, and combining unemployment insurance with part-time work during recessions, restrictions on advertising, a new design for the 21st century corporation, one that embraces rechartering and new ownership patterns and stakeholder primacy rather than shareholder primacy. Incentives for local and locally owned production and consumption, strong social and environmental provisions in trade agreements, rigorous environmental health and consumer protection, including full incorporation of environmental and social costs into prices, greater economic and social equality with a genuinely progressive taxation of the rich and greater income support for the poor, heavy spending on neglected public services, and initiatives to address population growth at home and abroad. Taken together, this packet of policies would undoubtedly slow GDP growth. But in our country today, the well-being of our people and the quality of life in America would go up, would improve, and that's what matters. Well, beyond the type of policy changes that I've been talking about, another path to a sustainable and just future is to seed the landscape with innovative models. I think one of the most remarkable things happening in the U.S. today is the proliferation of these models of local living economies, of sustainable communities and transition towns, of for-benefit businesses which prioritize community and environment over profit and growth. The community-owned Evergreen Cooperative in Cleveland is a wonderful case in point. And Those federal and state programs can be crafted to support community development and finance corporations, local banks, community land trusts, employee and consumer ownership, local currencies and time dollars, municipal enterprise, and nonprofits in business. So running parallel to these changes in policy and efforts at the local level, we know we've also got to change our national values. In particular, it's time to move beyond this runaway consumerism, our hyperventilating lifestyles. We know that there are mounting environmental and social costs to American affluence and extravagance and wastefulness. Even our larger homes and big lots are too small to accommodate all the stuff we're accumulating. The self-storage industry didn't exist until the early 70s, but its growth has been so rapid that its floor space in the U.S. Would now cover the entire island of Manhattan and San Francisco, the whole city combined. So we know we have this disease, affluenza, and we've got to mount a speedy recovery. The good news is that more and more people sense that at some level there's been a great misdirection of life's energy. We know that we're slighting the things that truly make life worthwhile. In a recent survey done by the Center for a New American Dream, 81% of America say they are too focused on shopping and spending. 88% say American society is too materialistic. And psychological studies in the Journal of Happiness Studies and others show that this materialism in America today is diametrically opposed to happiness. That more income and more possessions don't lead to lasting gains in our sense of well-being or our satisfaction with life or our happiness, and that what does make us happy are warm personal relationships and giving rather than getting. So, there's a revolutionary new product that's trying to make it in the marketplace. Nothing. It's guaranteed not to put you in debt. It's 100% non-toxic, sweatshop free, zero waste, no contribution to global warming, family friendly, and fun and creative. Well, there were some young women who went to the mall, I think in the upper Midwest, and tried to sell nothing. And they were asked to leave and they refused and were arrested. Good for them. So we know that none of these things is going to happen unless there's a strong and effective government advocating moving us in these directions. And the drive for the transformative changes that I've been talking about always leads back to the political arena, where we know that we need a vital and muscular democracy that's steered by an informed and engaged citizenry. Yet when we think about it that way, we see the enormity of the challenge every day. This ascendancy of market fundamentalism and the anti-regulation, anti-government ideology has been particularly frightening. It persists. But even the passing of these extreme ideas would leave deeper and more long-term deficiencies in our political culture and system. And so just as we need a new economy that prioritizes people and place and planet, we need a new politics to help us move in that direction. And we know many of the things that are wrong with Washington today, why it's more often part of the problem than the solution. It is deeply hooked on GDP growth. It's heavily influenced by the very corporations and concentrations of wealth it should be seeking to regulate and revamp. It's hobbled by an array of dysfunctional institutional arrangements, beginning with the way presidents are elected and including the way elections are funded and congressional voting occurs. So building the strength for political change requires, I would submit, first of all, a political fusion among progressives, a fusion that has got to start by forging a unified agenda. Such an agenda would embrace a profound commitment to social justice and environmental protection, a sustained challenge to consumerism and commercialism and the lifestyles that they offer, a healthy skepticism of growth mania, and a democratic redefinition of what society should be striving to grow, a challenge to corporate dominance and a redefinition of what the corporation's goals and incentive structure should be, commitment to an array of pro-democracy reforms in campaign finance and elections and the regulation of lobbying and much more. A common agenda would also include an ambitious set of new national indicators beyond GDP to inform us of the true quality of life in America. GDP, I think we know, is a perfectly terrible measure of national well-being and national progress, and we tend to get what we measure, so we ought to measure what we want. Well, that's my draft of a platform for progressive fusion. How good is it for uniting environmentalists and liberals and other progressive constituencies? Well, I hope it can serve that purpose to some degree. I guess we would all agree that a lot of it is, shall we say, ahead of its time, certainly in terms of U.S. politics today. But if some of these ideas seem politically impracticable today, just wait until tomorrow, because I think it's going to be clear to more and more people that really it's business as usual. That's the utopian fantasy. And that creating something very new and different is the practical and pragmatic thing to do. So my hope is that we can begin soon to have this sustained dialogue among liberals and environmental thinkers, thinking about the need for a common platform, thinking about the issue of growth, and generally about the need for progressive fusion. In the platform I just presented, I endeavored to find a way to support the goals that liberals see growth as supporting, notably job creation, while still accepting what I see as the underlying reality, namely that GDP growth in America today isn't delivering on its intended purposes, better human lives, and that it is, meanwhile, at the root of environmental losses and the emerging climate crisis. I hope the liberal community will come to terms with the now large body of environmental scholarship on this issue and do so before it's too late. I doubt that we will miss our growth fetish after we say goodbye to it. We've had tons of growth while wages stagnated, jobs fled our borders, life satisfaction flatlined, social capital eroded, poverty mounted, and the environment declined. And environmentalists, for their part, have got to abandon their silo and do things like embrace the excellent social agenda laid out by Bob Reich in his book Aftershock. There and many other places, liberals have advocated a series of far-reaching and admirable measures to address America's vast social insecurity and income disparities. I find some hope that real change is indeed possible in many places today. Progressive causes are turning to the task of building grassroots political strength, finally. There's a proliferation across the American landscape of new models of enterprise and community development and revitalization. There's a growing questioning of consumerist lifestyles, and people are certainly fed up with American politics. Then there's the birth of a series of new economy organizations and initiatives that are committed to linking these issues and forging the new strengths for systemic change. To conclude, let me pull this together. What if the following occurred? And ask yourself, are these things within reach? Are they occurring today even? A decline in the legitimacy of the system as it fails to deliver social and environmental well-being, together with a mounting sense of crisis and loss, both occurring at a time of wise leadership and accompanied by the articulation of a new American narrative, a new American story, by the appearance across the country of new and appropriate models, and by the projection of a powerful set of new ideas and policy proposals, confirming that the path to a better world does indeed exist. Were all these things to come together, real change would be possible, and the prospects for that would be enhanced and advanced by a new social movement in our country, one that is powerful and inclusive. In the end, I think we have to realize that all the progressive constituencies in our country face the exact same reality. We live and work in a system of political economy that cares profoundly about profit and growth. It cares about society and the natural world in which it operates, mainly to the extent that it's required to do so. So it's up to us then, as citizens, to inject values of justice and fairness and sustainability into this system. And of course, government is the primary vehicle we have for doing this. But we mainly fail at it because our politics are now too enfeebled, and government is more and more in the hands of powerful corporations and great wealth. So our best hope for real change is thus a fusion of those concerned about environment and social justice and true democracy into one powerful progressive force. We're all communities of shared fate. We'll all rise or fall together, so we better get together. Thank you very much. I'm happy to comments, criticisms, questions. Yes.
Thank you, first of all. It was a wonderful presentation. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, can we achieve what you're just talking about without addressing the issue of growing militarism in this country?
I began by saying that I wasn't talking about the international affairs in the interest of brevity, but I think the answer to your question is no. I don't think there's a prayer of addressing these issues unless we deal in a very different way with international challenges. And we have the American empire. It has probably somewhere between 700 and 1,000 military bases around the world in scores of countries. A military budget that's somewhere between, 800 billion and $1 trillion a year now, more than the whole rest of the world spends on the military. I think in many ways, if you look at it historically, we, a lot of the seeds of the problems that we have today were planted during the Cold War as a result of the things that we did then, and all of which seems to have been exacerbated by this current focus on terrorism, which, as the Washington Post has documented, is so big and multifaceted and has so many institutions and people associated with it that even the people nominally in charge of it say they don't understand it. So I think this is a big part of the problem. Absolutely. Yeah.
where in your framework would you fit increase in productive efficiency caused by the growth of knowledge and technical change? I mean, this is an autonomous force. It obviously has its environmental benefits. It's very disruptive in other ways.
Well, I think a big part of the solution would be what, you and I have probably called in one context or another, kind of an environmental revolution in technology. If we really could succeed in advancing, technological change, there's no way to solve these problems without a dramatic series of technological changes and innovations, a lot of which we have available to us now and aren't using. Another interesting point about technology comes out of some recent work, but so much of technology and technological change is combining existing elements of technology into something new and innovative, and so in a way it's a part of the commons, the technology commons, and we and yet the people who who have the capacity to profit from that aren't very good at sharing some of this commons back with the rest of us. Gar Alperovitz and Lou Daly wrote a book about that, and it's consistent with thinking on technology from the Santa Fe Institute and others. All right, yes?
I was wondering, when you talk about the need for this unified agenda to push forward and have a democratic redefinition of what society should focus on, how do you reconcile that with the fact that previously you were speaking of how the government is really not inclined to curb a lot of the problems right now because they're catering to the corporate interests?
Well, you can't reconcile those two things now. And that was, why I think that really, I've said this to people, if I had to sort of start over my life now, God forbid, I think what I'd plunge into in various ways is changing the political system. Because unless we do something about this rotten American politics today, which may be in temporary, holding pattern for a few days here, but I think it's nothing much is going to, nothing big will happen unless we. There's no other force that we can mount. The autonomous technological change is not going to save us. The business community on its own is not going to deal with these issues. And the instrument that we've got for dealing with them is government, and we've just got to take it back. And that's going to be a long, hard slog. Now, hopefully, the people will have enough wisdom to deal with things that can't wait, like climate change, while we're making these, building this new politics. Yeah.
Taking up on your last remarks, what would you propose that each one of us do tomorrow or next month to help take back the political system?
Oh, I thought you were going to make it more general.
No, not at all. I want to pin you down.
I'm having dinner with you tomorrow night.
Touche.
But here you've got all these budding, bright young lawyers to speak to.
No,
what are you going to ask them to do?
Yep, that's a very good question. Well, I think that one thing that, the thing that I think we have the most power to do is to create these, create strength at the local level. To get into local politics, to form these new types of enterprises that bring together, the best of the private sector and the government sector and the NGO sector. These are proliferating across the country. to start making every town in our country a transition town, to put solar energy in Ned Coffin's backyard in Stratford, and I think we could, and a lot of this, to talk about Vermont, we could have a renewable Vermont, a renewable energy Vermont. We can pioneer a lot of the things here in Vermont that would set an example for the rest of the country. Some of them think that this is Disneyland up here. We know that, but we can prove them better with the new corporations law that we have and the opportunities that opens up. So I think the answer that I would offer is to really try to build. I mentioned in the talk the proliferation across the landscape of these innovative models, and because when the rest of the system really becomes even more discredited than it is now, people will look around to see who's doing it right, and if it's Ithaca, New York, we'll notice that, and there's a lot of the tremendous vitality in activities at the local level, and I think that's the real way to plunge in. There's a lot going on in local, shift to local banks, slow food, local sourcing of food and other products, local currencies. This is all very exciting, and there's a way to make that go forward to larger and larger scale. There are many people who believe that's the only way forward, really, right now, is to do these things. That the big changes that we'll need eventually are not now in our grasp. Yeah.
I'm wondering why we know that we're not going to get the change from the government, we're not going to get it from the states. Why is it that we don't use the ability of the people to make constitutional changes? Why is it that we just never go down the route of trying to make, say, Citizens United go away, or make political contributions be minimal per person?
Well, there is an effort underway. It's called Move to Amend, to roll back Citizens United and indeed to change the constitutional status of corporations. And there are a number of these initiatives like that taking root in the country. And I don't know why there's not more effort like that. But why not? We ought to be able to, get another thing that's going on out there in the constitutional, quasi-constitutional sense, is the very clever thing that now half a dozen states have adopted, wherein they undermine the Electoral College. And if enough states adopt it, this pact, they will, in effect, we will have popular election of the president. And that's it's a fairly simple thing. The state just commits to vote its electoral delegates to the winner of the popular vote at the national level, okay? And they agree to, that goes into effect as soon as there are enough states who adopt that policy to elect, to be a majority of the Electoral College. And the 7 states, including Massachusetts, have now adopted this. So there are things that can be done of this type. And then there are a lot of local efforts to challenge. There are a lot of cities, not a lot, but enough cities to notice, have ruled that within their borders, corporations are not people. Now that's more symbolic than anything else, but it does. There are challenges to these issues. It'd be great if we could quit worshiping the Constitution and think seriously about what type of changes we really needed. It's do away with the Senate. Yay! Yes.
I think we may be able to learn from history, too. And I'm thinking particularly of the progressive movement in the United States in the early part of the last century.
Give us a history lesson.
With Robert La Follette. And out of that came some very interesting work in the States, particularly in Wisconsin, that led to the creation of unemployment insurance, Social Security. In other words, the states in that period were crucibles for change in democracy. And I think we could learn about what were the elements that brought that about, and are they applicable today, or can they be made applicable today?
Well, that's a very good thought, and if you really want to, La Follette founded the magazine The Progressive, and it's still in business. And a year or so ago, they had their anniversary, I guess it was, so they did a sort of anniversary issue of excerpts from every issue of The Progressive over the whole lifespan of the magazine. And it's just fascinating to go back and read it. There's nothing new under the sun, These battles have been around for a long time. And I think it is true that a lot of the most progressive things, and certainly the only climate regulations that we have been enacted now at the state level and local, but the really impressive things at the state levels. And so far, in the old days when I was young, and the idea was to get everything to Washington. The states were viewed as lost causes. And if you wanted to get environmental regulation, federalize it, get it to Washington. If you wanted to get social reform, get it to Washington. And it's kind of the opposite today. We have some real opportunities, at least in a lot of states. Now, some of them are moving backwards. Some states are trying to undo their commitment. The new governors are trying to undo their commitments on climate, for example. But there's still a lot of opportunity at the state level, absolutely, which is another answer to Ned's question. Yeah.
Sort of a follow-up on that question or the comment on the power of the states.
Yeah.
And the amendment movement. I would think maybe, or I'd venture the question, what about the power of reaching out to the conservative side of the country and talking about it in terms of taxation, no taxation without representation. And the problem is still private special interests corrupting our system, but we approach it with the conservative side from a different angle, using different language.
Well, obviously, I'm not the person to do that, but I think it can be done. I think David Sirota wrote this book about the populist uprising some years ago, and he pointed out that there was this rising frustration in the country, and people were getting furious with the government. And government, we deserve to get mad at government, right? I mean, the feckless incompetence down there, and so but that sort of morphed into Tea Party, and wasn't captured by progressive populism. And I really think that it would be possible to craft an agenda which would appeal to people that we now think of as conservative or Tea Party people. They have every right to be mad at government, don't they? I mean, they get it wrong, I think, but they have so there is an agenda that a man I got some respect for wrote a book called Crunchy Cons. Crunchy conservatives, right? And Rod Dreher, and he's basically a very conservative guy. But I look at the values that he talks about in this book. Family, being honest, and caring, and it's hard not to think that that there's room for maneuvering here and building those bridges too. Which, by the way, is one thing that I'm talking in this talk. I talked about this progressive fusion, and I've come to that conclusion, but that's really the only way, and that we all are in the same boat in these progressive communities and causes. But the the thought in the environmental community has been in the past that to cast a big tent, to be able to reach out to all kinds of people and all kinds of and I think that we need to do that too. I don't see any reason that we can't have a huge fusion of progressive forces, including environmental forces, and at the same time have other people and other groups working on the other side of the street, so to speak, or the aisle. Yes.
Communications, the media. One of the ways, of course, that we're blocked is by the takeover of the communications industry by the corporations, such that news in all of its formats has to be profitable now, which has resulted in the vast deterioration of content and the capture of the media by some pretty upsetting points of view. And so, you or anybody else in the room's ideas on how we can, as progressive, communicate and be heard.
Yeah. Well, maybe there are better people here to talk about that. I know a lot of reporters who started in this business back when some of us in this room did, who are as frustrated as anybody could be with what the transformations that's happened in the media. People like Phil Shabakov, who was a New York Times environment correspondent for a long time, and even more Ross Gelbspan, Pulitzer Prize winner, I think, was with Boston Globe. Could not be more caustic on what's happened to the news media in the country, the consolidation and in a way, Ross and others were writing before the other thing that happened, which is the fragmentation of the message. So people now pick and choose what they want to hear, and it merely reinforces what they want to hear. I do that. I'm not. Most I see of Fox News is on the Daily Show. Yeah.
I was in Montpelier yesterday, and the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund just released the executive summary of the Farm to Plate initiative. And,
now, what issue?
What's that?
What issue?
They just released the executive summary of the Farm to Plate initiative.
Okay.
And it's a 10-year statewide
Farm
strategy.
to Plate.
Yep, Farm to Plate, covering food systems from soil to soil. And it occurs to me as you're talking about need for progressive fusion that this could be an issue that could crystallize such a thing, the food system issue.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's actually doing it. And it may have more legs than any other thing going on right now in this sort of area. There's just a tremendous emphasis on interest in local production, in sustaining agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and in a way, if this climate thing goes as badly as we have every reason to expect now, we're all going to need some crafts, some things that we can do locally to sustain us and our neighbors. And this is what McKibben, is saying in that book, Earth. It's all about. Yes.
The posters behind you on the bulletin board are for Ellen Taylor to present on that Farm to Plate initiative here for free on the 27th evening.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Yes.
How do you create jobs without creating growth?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I did talk about that, and I think first it's what you don't do. There's a lot of talk among progressives that we have to sort of stimulate the overall economy in hopes that it'll create a lot of jobs. And I really don't believe that that's going to lead to a lot of jobs, anything like the amount that we need. So I think we need a lot of other types of programs that create powerful incentives for job creation directly in areas where we want to have growth. There are a lot of government policies that know how to do this. The stimulus program that Obama went forward to, and has created a certain amount of grief for him, was a combination of that plus tax relief. And the tax relief was designed to stimulate the overall economy. The part of that program which has probably created jobs is the more direct spending on all the country's huge needs. So we ought to be putting vast resources into these things. And there are indirect ways, like if we had a price on carbon, that would certainly stimulate energy growth in the right directions. I don't think that Roosevelt had such a bad idea with some of the things they had to do in the New Deal to put people to work. I keep looking for my WPA check, but the needs are huge. Environmental amenity needs are huge at all levels, from national parks to backyards and things, and backyard parks and all. So I think there are a lot of different. If we put our minds to it, we could frame an agenda that could put a lot of people at work. And there are people now trying to look at this question of linking. For example, a lot of studies have shown that you can create more jobs by some of the, for example, in energy efficiency and other, green jobs. Investments in green technologies can create more jobs than a lot of other investments could. So I think there's a lot that can be done. I think what we can't do is nothing, which is what, the Congress is inclined to do now. Or alternatively, just hope that by stimulating the economy, for example, with another huge tax break, which the Congress just enacted, it's going to help a little bit on that front. But as I've said, the other thing, and this is important, I mentioned the Peter Victor model for Canada, in which everything works. One way it all works, and this is pretty consistent in the variety of analyses which have been done, is by people not working as much. And that's why in that mix, he has increased leisure and family time as one of the things that is accomplished in his model. And a lot of people have looked at this. We need, James Galbraith, for example, recently had an article, in the context of this deficit thing, people talking about raising the retirement age, and he's arguing we should be lowering the retirement age. We should be having programs that blend retirement and, part-time retirement type things. And people, if we now work 300 hours a year more than the average European country, well, that's almost a day a week, off if we wanted it. So what the model that people are trying to grow to in their heads is that, people should begin to take productivity gains not as extra income, but as extra leisure. We put in, more hours than any country in the OECD in terms of the work year. And so I think, there are a lot of different, there's a lot of ways to have, to get at the issue of basically work sharing. And with a lot more time off. This sounds a lot like France. Mike.
Well, in 2 words, isn't this really about intense greed? And have you set a date for your march on Washington?
Check out a website called iMatter. Anybody know iMatter? Is there a single person here who has been to the iMatter website? Thank you. Just one. Well, I don't know that it's going to be a very big march. But This is being spearheaded not by the environmentalists, not by the climate justice community. This I Matter March is being spearheaded by kids. It's a group of people, and they're going to have their march on Mother's Day, May 8th. It's all about families and young people, and there's a wonderful guy, Alex, who's really the very charismatic 16-year-old, who's going to help promote this thing. And there may be around that time a flurry of lawsuits across the planet, all filing an identical complaint, all saying that the government that they're suing holds the air and the atmosphere and the climate in trust for them and for people, and is now violating that trust and asking for relief to change it. So this is a gigantic use of the public trust doctrine that's being thought about. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but anyhow, those. I tried to march on Washington one time. We, in recent years, we organized a march, and I was heavily involved in it, and it was going to challenge the Capitol Hill power plant. The Capitol Hill power plant is within a stone's throw of the Capitol, and it runs on coal. And so that was going to be the focus. And we went down there on a very cold day, and McKibben was with us, and Wendell Berry, and all kinds of people were there. And we marched, and we marched, and we marched, and we had speeches, and it was really quite good. And then we were going to get arrested. And we had arranged with the D.C. police to arrest the ringleaders. And I was one of them. And so we stood at the gate of the power plant and waited and waited and waited. And finally, Ted Glick, I don't know if you know Ted, but he's been a constant rabble-rouser on these issues. Ted went to talk to the police, and they said, we're going to stay here all night. And they said, we don't care. So they broke their promise to us that they would arrest us, and it was a great disappointment that we didn't get arrested. But these people from Charlotte came up after that and said, if you want to get arrested, come down to Charlotte and join us, because we're going to challenge a big coal-fired power plant proposal on such and such a date. And they were arrested. I hope this thing on May Day, May 8th, works out really big. And I don't know how these kids are going to get out of school or whatever. Are we running out now? Yes.
I'm just curious, you mentioned population growth, and I kind of feel like it's a huge issue that factors in here, but it's often not discussed. I was wondering what your thoughts were on how to compensate for such population growth as we're experiencing. Given that we're trying not to have economic growth in that sense, how are we going to compensate for the population?
If you want to envision a steady state economy, just think about an economy in which, basically the labor force is declining in size. And that is, but the economy is steady because of that decline is offset by rising productivity. And that's a entirely, viable alternative if the labor force is declining. And the problem with the population issue in this country, there are several problems with it. One is that we haven't really learned how to discuss the issue without sounding like, border vigilantes. And I think it needs to be brought back into the dialogue, into the discourse on environment and other issues. And we need to find out how to do that without sounding like we're anti-immigrant. We need to do it in a way that steers clear of of the pro-life, pro-choice issue. And I think all that can be done. I remember when in the 70s it caught on, this idea of stop it too. And I remember I was at the Natural Resources Defense Council at the time as an attorney, and we had all sort of said we were going to stop it too. And I remember I had to put a note on the bulletin board one day: is there anybody here who wants to have a cap and trade with me and stop at one, because I need another permission slip, and that was Charlie. Anyhow, but you're right. This needs to come back. It's a huge issue, and internationally, it's a tragedy, because we know what to do, really, in a sense. I mean, if you combine maternal and child health care, non-coercive family planning services, empowerment of women, education for girls, you put that package together, fertility rates go down everywhere that's been done, and but this is the other big part of that issue is going to be the pressure from the business sector to maximize immigration or jobs and that kind of thing. So if we it's going to be it's a devilish issue, but we need to learn how to talk about it and understand it. There are groups that work on this quite intelligently. I can't remember Vicki Markham's group's name, but it's something like the Center for Population and Environment. They do a really nice job on these issues. Yeah.
Two disconnected thoughts and one question. The New Economics Institute has a study out that says 20 hours per week.
The New Economics Foundation in London.
The New Economics Foundation
yes.
Has a study out where 20 hours a week is what is the appropriate amount for work. The other thing is, I and a number of people in this room are working at starting a local farm food and local economy initiative in this area, the Royalton, Randolph, Upper White River Valley area. If people are interested in that, actually we have at 7 o'clock where a group is planning a growing local festival, and the map room at 7 o'clock right after this, if anybody's interested in that, that's part of the work. And the question is, way back to the political, how do we change the political? And I've been thinking, that's the hardest thing for me to try and figure out, how do you reshape the political? And the most interesting thing, I keep sort of getting drawn to it and then sort of stepping back from it, but there's a movement in Vermont that I'm not part of that is a secessionist movement, basically to take Vermont out. And I keep thinking, if there wanted to be a wake-up call, in other words, in many ways, just like you were talking that the states are sort of where things are happening, what if we really took that political step? That would really start putting a lot of people around the country on notice. So anyway, I just sort of throw that out there. I'm drawn to sort of, engaging more with that, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, I think I love Ian Baldwin and Kirkpatrick Sale and others who've been in the leaders of this secessionist movement. And if you read the newsletter, their newspaper, really, I think you see a lot of the values that we've talked about here are very much held. But I'm not quite in that camp yet. I'd like to see them, gain some strength and get more visibility. But I had this. Being from South Carolina, I think I'll just stay out of Yeah. And there are crazy things going on in the country, right? I mean, there's actually, the war was partly, secondarily about the nullification idea, and now they're trying to talk about constitutional amendments. People are trying to get an amendment going on nullification again. Really crazy. Yes.
It's been a lot about our local economy, our government. I'm thinking about the larger picture of the world and the idea that we are the major consumers, we are the major proliferators of arms. And what lifestyle would we as Americans and we as first world nations need to adopt in order to do the values that you're talking about so eloquently, the values of goodness, fairness, justice, equality, love, care, compassion, empathy for the rest of the world, in order for all of the world to be able to share in a similar lifestyle. So they wouldn't be, challenged and challenging us, by attacks, by, all sorts of ways of being envious maybe a little jealous, maybe a little, disgusted, by what we do.
Yeah. Well, I do think we need a global vision, and I agree with you. We need envisioning both at the national level and at the global level, I think, and there's too little of that to try to, do it from a sort of start with a rigorous set of understandings. For example, planetary boundaries, ecological boundaries, which we shouldn't be exceeding.
My question was literally, what lifestyle do individuals need to take on in the first world nations? Lifestyle. Gore's lifestyle, I'm not impressed with. I am impressed by a gentleman who's written the book, Simple Living, or, I forget his, I'm a little tense right now. Jim Turkle. And I guess I believe that in order to walk our talk, we're going to have to literally do things like that.
Yeah. No, it's going to be, my guess is that, the lifestyle of the future is going to be very, very different. I mean, it's from what what we're doing now. I mean, I think we'll look back on this period as one of, extraordinary extravagance, wastefulness, insensitivity, and no, I don't think your question is really different from what I was trying to say. I mean, I think we need novelists and writers and people who understand these issues to begin to describe that lifestyle, and we because we know some things about it, and I think one of those things is that we're going to have to turn a lot more things over to women. But all right, we're running down here, I think. It's 7 o'clock. You've got a meeting. Wait a minute. One last question.
Glad that you're going to take my question because you're probably one of the best people to speak on.
No,
not best, but,
running down here.
So we're talking about the progressive and the liberal push for smaller growth or less growth. But how do you reconcile that when popular solutions to climate change are likely going to come from the establishment of new financial markets? Yeah. Are we just is this just going to move forward and the progressives are going to be like, wait, no?
Well, I think if we had I guess I don't understand the dilemma there. We could, for example, some people, you might think that it would be easier to transform technology and decarbonize the economy in a rapidly growing economy, right? It's just impression that, that's more vital, and there's more investment going on, and there's more money to do things. But if you look at the data, which Peter Victor in Canada has done, and not just for Canada, what he finds is that the technological transformation, the decarbonization of economies has occurred, if anything, more rapidly in the context of slow growth rather than rapid growth. Perhaps surprising answer, and he says it needs to be, more work needs to be done. So I don't think that, even there, I don't think growth gives you, what you're looking for, the sort of vitality to make a technological transformation of the economy.
Can I just make one quick comment? I think if we want to understand the political scene better, if more people listened or watched to Democracy Now!, they'd get a more complete picture of what's going on in the world. But NPR won't touch it except for a few stations here or there. So that's another way to get better informed.
You have to go to Free Speech TV.
That's right.
Channel 9413 or something like that. Yeah, I'm not exaggerating. That's where it is.